Please sit. Comrade leaders and members of the Alliance for Revolutionary Change, the leadership and members of the Movement for Change, Otumfuos Maria Hine, Bafo Dr. Osei Shiamang Brentuo, the 6th, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives from sister political parties and political entities, Nime, Name, Nananum, captains of industry, the leadership of faith-based organizations, high-level representatives from academia and civil society, distinguished invited guests, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start first by expressing my profound gratitude to you all for taking time of your very busy schedule this afternoon to join us for this very important event. I'm indeed humbled to have the privilege and honor of hosting such a distinguished gathering. On the 6th of March, 1957, Dr. Kyeremanten heroically declared before an ecstatic crowd at the old polo grounds in Accra that at long last the battle is ended and Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. Although the expectations at that time was for political freedom, in subsequent speeches of Dr. Kyeremanten, there was a clear desire for Ghana also to become economically independent. But regrettably, 67 years after the shackles of colonial domination was dismantled, Ghana, our beloved country, is still unable to feed itself. Unable to provide jobs for our young population. Unable to provide potable water for almost half of its population. Unable to keep our lights on. Unable to provide decent housing for the majority of its people. And I could go on and on and on. We have been compelled for the 17th time, to seek a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. Although we pride ourselves as one of the leading producers of gold in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the question we should be asking ourselves at this stage is, how did we get here? How long do we intend to stay here? And what will it take for us to exit from here and never return? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. In my humble opinion, we are at where we are now because we've brought it upon ourselves, as we say in local Ghanaian parlance. Whilst there may be a myriad of contributing factors, the three that clearly stand out are one, a failure of leadership. Number two, the divisiveness in our body politic and political space. And three, our own unproductive attitude, behavior, and mindset as a people. Ladies and gentlemen, although our situation may be disquieting, the good news is that Ghana still remains a favored nation in both the spiritual and physical realms. What we need now is a transformational leader, a paradigm shift in our governance system, as well as a mindset change amongst Ghanaians. We have an opportunity in the general elections in December this year to cross that bridge and move Ghana into a new era of peace and prosperity by electing me as the first independent candidate to become the President of the Republic of Ghana. I will install a new government of national unity that will mobilize the collective strengths and talents of all Ghanaians, and not only a privileged few, irrespective of ethnic, political, or religious affiliation. Ladies and gentlemen, both the NDC and NPP have had the opportunity of being in charge of this country for the last 32 years. I believe in all sincerity that they have exhausted their competencies and capabilities and ought not to be restored or retained in power, considering the fact that they have not demonstrated either by word or deed that they have any plan for Ghana. Five months to a general election, we are still waiting for the manifestos of our two leading parties. Between the two leading parties, they have, over the 3 decades that they have been in power, resorted to extensive borrowing to finance their manifesto promises. The culture of unrestrained borrowing is what has landed us into the ditch in which we find ourselves. A significant component of the loans that have been acquired have gone into financing consumption, the repayment of existing loans, and investments in social services that typically do not generate any economic returns in the immediate short to medium term, and therefore limit our capacity to service those loans. But ladies and gentlemen, I have a plan. I have a plan, the great transformational plan, which will build an enterprise economy in Ghana, focusing on private enterprise, innovation, and the unleashing of the entrepreneurial spirit of the people of Ghana. This is what will take Ghana forward to occupy its rightful place in the Committee of Nations as the Black Star of Africa, the Shining Star of Africa, and the first country south of the Sahara to become independent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is why we are here today, to launch the most comprehensive policy framework, the GTP, that will move Ghana from instability to stability, to growth, to resilience, and to prosperity. The GTP is comprised of 6 interrelated clusters: economic, governance, infrastructure, social services, environment and natural resource management, and last but not the least, behavioral and mindset change. Each cluster has a number of pillars, thematic areas, and policy solutions. The plan is significantly different from the party manifestos that have been presented by the 2 political parties that have been in power in Ghana for decades. The policy solutions under the GTP are concise, clear, and action-oriented. For the purposes of this presentation, and particularly due to the limitation of time, I will limit myself primarily to presenting only parts of the economic and governance clusters, with a sprinkling with some of few policy solutions from the other clusters. So let me start with the economic cluster. The economic cluster consists of 4 pillars, namely the macroeconomy, industrial transformation, a new agricultural revolution, and tourism. The macroeconomic pillar starts with our policies on expenditure management and control. And I propose the following policy solutions. 1, reduce the current size of government and run a lean executive administration consisting of not more than 40 ministers. Eliminate sole sourcing in public procurement and contracting to ensure value for money, which has over the years been a major source of the bloating of government expenditure. 3, consolidate into a single administrative unit all existing government departments, agencies, and other public sector organizations which have overlapping mandates. The Ministry of Energy, for example, has 14 different agencies under it. Reinforce existing mechanisms in payroll and employee compensation management and administration, which is designed to eliminate ghost names from the public sector. It's only in Ghana that ghosts continue to appear and reappear. Reduce government financing of infrastructure projects by at least 60%. Reduce government spending and financing on infrastructure projects by at least 60%. And in place, introduce innovative private sector financing of infrastructure using models such as build, operate, and transfer, BOT, build, own, and operate, BOO, EPC with financing, EPC with suppliers' credits. Undertake a comprehensive review of the entire structure of government spending and public expenditure with a view to reducing the national public expenditure ratio to gross domestic product. That is the ratio of public expenditure to GDP, to a target not exceeding 10% over a period of 5 years. On revenue optimization, undertake a complete reform of the tax structure in Ghana with a view to optimizing revenue from the mobilization of direct taxes rather than indirect taxes through the import duties, taxes, and levies, particularly at the ports. And this is what prevails in many of the matured economies. They focus more on direct taxes than indirect taxes. And we are going to change that system in Ghana. 3, enforce existing regulations linking access to essential public services to the payment of taxes. If you don't pay your tax, you will not have access to essential government services. 4, conduct a comprehensive financial and technical audit of port operations to identify and block revenue leakages at the ports, including but not limited to mechanisms to address trade misinvoicing and transfer pricing. Enhance the collection of rent tax, property tax, capital gains tax, investment income tax, and sin taxes. Review existing rates for road tolls and expand the application across various road networks. Establish a free port enclave at the Tema port to enhance vessel traffic and transshipment in Ghana, which will bring in additional revenue from port services. Conduct an extensive review of the operations of SOEs, state-owned enterprises, with a view to enhancing their contribution to government revenue. Enhance the application of technology, including artificial intelligence and blockchain technology, in revenue mobilization, and equip revenue collection agencies with relevant tools and facilities. And last but not the least, conduct a comprehensive review of the management and administration of the Ghana Revenue Authority with a view to enhancing the efficiency and effectiveness in tax administration and revenue mobilization. The above policy measures are designed to increase the ratio of tax revenue to GDP from the current 14% to 20% over a period of 5 years. On lower taxes and duties, first, eliminate the existing compounded calculation of VAT and consolidate the NHIA and GET fund levies with a VAT rate. 2, abolish the special import levy of 2%. 3, abolish the COVID-19 health recovery levy. 4, abolish the Ghana Health Service disinfection fee. How can we be collecting COVID fee and disinfection fee in 2024? Abolish all taxes and other charges on the importation of spare parts within a period of 2 years after the establishment of the government of national unity. Undertake a comprehensive assessment of the relevance of all taxes, administrative charges, and levies that have been imposed at the ports with a view to eliminating all nuisance taxes and thereby reducing the tax burden on importers. The above policy prescriptions will make Ghana have the lowest tax rate regime in the whole of ECOWAS sub-region within a period of 3 years. On a stable currency, on this issue of stable currency, review the operations of foreign exchange bureaus with a view to eliminating speculative and unauthorized trading of forex. Enforce existing regulations on the repatriation of foreign exchange proceeds from exports. I'm sure you realize that there are regulations for the repatriation of proceeds from exports, and yet nobody respects the regulations. Review and strengthen existing legislation to limit the use of foreign currency in domestic commercial transactions, particularly in the services sector. Everybody wants to charge dollars. And meanwhile, that is not your currency. And if you are charging dollars for every activity, how do you hope to stabilize your currency? There are countries, even in Africa, where not under any circumstances will they accept dollars or any other foreign currency to pay for services. Increase the supply of foreign exchange in the economy by actively promoting exports and also reducing imports through import substitution by providing incentives to the private sector. How many times have you heard a Ghanaian head of state talk about exports? But alas, if you want to stabilize your currency, that is the only solution. Because it is only when you have a consistent and substantial flow of current currency that is chasing the dollar that you can stabilize your local currency. These policy prescriptions will lead to a significant reduction in the depreciation of the cedi, and stabilize our cedi, our local currency, within a period maximum of 1 year. On low inflation, fix the foreign exchange rate for the importation of strategic commodities such as petroleum and essential medicines below the prevailing foreign exchange market rate as a second forex window, as a short-term policy measure in order to reduce the pass-through effects of the depreciation of the local currency on strategic commodity prices. As a country, we have no choice but to import petroleum products until we start adding value to our oil and gas resources. If your cedi is depreciating and you allow the exchange rate, the depreciating rate, to influence the price of petroleum products, then obviously the prices of all goods, because of the multiply effect of petroleum, would always be on the rise. So you have to ring fence the depreciation of the cedi in respect of products that are of a strategic nature, and you have no choice to import them. If we do this, we'll stabilize the currency. Establish a fixed exchange rate for a period not exceeding 6 months for the calculation of import duties in local currency as a short-term policy measure to reduce the high level of imported inflation. If you import a bag of rice and it lands in Tema, the duty that you pay is calculated in local currency but based on the prevailing market rate. So at the time you are importing your 1 bag of rice, if the dollar was 13 cedis to $1, within the next 3 months, when the bag of rice arrives and the dollar is now exchanged for 16 cedis to $1, the importer is not a saint. It means that he now has to pay more in local currency because of the depreciating exchange rate. And they have no choice but to pass this on. So unless you provide stability within a short period of time for those who are importing goods, then the rate of exchange, the depreciating cedi, would always continue to affect prices in our economy. And with an economy that is highly dependent on imports, as your currency depreciates, the prices of goods will continue to rise. I hope I'm making sense. The two go together. This is not magic. Then promote the creation of a parallel system of food storage and distribution in the private sector to mitigate the effects of high food prices associated with seasonal food shortages. As you know, one of the biggest challenges that we have in our country is high food prices, which is high inflation, food inflation. Now, if you create a parallel system in the private sector, then you can be assured that they would, whilst looking for a commercial return on their own investment, that they can help government control the prices of food in our country. Next, introduce measures to reduce food price inflation by boosting food production. If you increase food production, this is basic economics. If you increase food production, then the unit prices of goods, food prices will come down. And that will help you also to reduce food inflation. But it's not just about increasing food production. You must also reduce the costs along the food supply chain. Transport costs, storage costs, preservation costs, and marketing costs. So unless we have policy solutions that are addressing these costs, food inflation would always be high, and the general level of inflation would also be high. On interest rates, I think it was one of my alliance colleagues who said that you cannot borrow at 45% and compete with countries in ECOWAS who are borrowing at 6%. It's not possible. As the Americans say, it ain't gonna happen. So the level of interest rates would determine whether our companies are competitive or not. First, we have to get the central bank to reduce their policy rate progressively to single digit. As you know, the Bank of Ghana has their own interest rate, which is the policy rate. And that is the rate that when banks borrow from the central bank, it is that rate that is used to lend money from central bank to commercial banks. If your policy rate, that's your Bank of Ghana rate, is 25%, do you expect commercial banks to reduce their interest rates below the policy rate? It ain't gonna happen. But if you progressively reduce the Bank of Ghana policy rate to single digits in Ghana, interest rates will come down to single digits. This is practical economics. Now, the above policy prescriptions will lead to a reduction of inflation to single digit within a period maximum 2 years. Now, on debt sustainability management, you are aware that it's because of the level of our debts. That is why we are at the IMF. So the GTP is proposing that for us to have sustainable debt levels, first, we have to maintain a strict capping on government borrowing to ensure that public debt does not exceed 55% of GDP. when we first went to the IMF, our own calculation of debt to GDP was around 70%. In the very first meetings with the IMF, they said, no, your debt to GDP cannot be 70%. So they recalculated our debt to GDP for us. And our debt to GDP went up to 105%. 105%. Now, for the IMF to agree to sign a package of support for Ghana, they asked us to reduce our debt to GDP ratio from 105% to 55%. That is where the haircut has come from. From 105% to 55%. Because according to the IMF, it is only at levels not exceeding 55% that your debt is sustainable. Beyond that, they will not allow you to borrow. So, what the GTP is saying is that we have to maintain strict capping on government borrowing to ensure that our debt to GDP does not go beyond 55%. Am I making sense? Next, enhance government revenue from exports to provide resources for budget support and thereby reduce the over-reliance on debt to finance our deficit. If you are exporting and you mobilize resources, this is government revenue from exports. So what would be the need for you to go around borrowing? And if the only source of forex for your economy is from cocoa and a limited amount from gold, then obviously you have to continue borrowing. And that's the beauty of the policies under the GTP. Refocus government debt management strategy from borrowing from international capital markets to provide incentives to attract FDI. There's a lot of money floating around in the world. Government does not need to continue building roads. Every politician would like to build roads because that's where the corruption starts. Because that's where the contracting starts. But if you go to some of the powerful economies in the world, most of the roads were built by private sector capital. Even international airports, first-class international airports, are owned by the private sector. In Ghana, because people want to borrow to finance the construction of an airport, they will tell you that for security reasons, the government has to borrow and construct the airport. On increasing financing for SMEs, direct banks to allocate the equivalent of a minimum of 10% of their profit after tax to the provision of new collateral-free concessionary lending to SMEs. Even in the United States, the capital of enterprise economies, even there, they can regulate and legislate for banks to provide a certain portion of their loanable funds to support small and medium enterprises. Provide regulatory capital incentives to banks to lend to SMEs at concessionary rates and provide loan guarantee schemes to these banks to cover the risk associated with lending to SMEs. all the banks will tell you about the fact that they cannot lend to SMEs because lending to SMEs is risky. It's the responsibility of government to provide loan guarantee support to release the liquidity in the banks to support SME development. Reforms in cocoa sector financing. We do not use dollars to buy cocoa from our farmers. Are you aware of that? But every year, the government syndicates almost $2 billion to go and buy cocoa. You don't pay cocoa farmers in dollars, but you are borrowing on their behalf $2 billion to buy cocoa from them. So obviously, if you sell your cocoa, all the money you get will have to go back to repay the loans. So what I'm proposing is that we will abolish the existing practice of cocoa external loan syndication. And in place of that, we will issue domestic bonds and securities to mobilize money, cedis, from Ghana to buy cocoa from the farmers. So that when we sell our cocoa, the full benefit of cocoa will come into the economy. Number two, are you aware that the most important organization in your country, Cocoa Board, because it handles the most important commodity in Ghana, the financial accounts of Cocoa Board is outside government's balance sheet? You say how? Cocoa balance sheet is not part of government's balance sheet. So GTP is saying that when the government of national unity is established, and when the enterprise economy is established, we'll consolidate the balance sheet of Cocoa Board with government's own balance sheet. If you allow Cocoa Board to prepare its own balance sheet, then you have no control over it. But can you believe that we have had this practice for so many decades? So you understand why you are where you are. Now, deepening of capital markets and financial intermediation. We will offload a minimum of 40% of the share capital of all viable SOEs. And listen to me, I'm not talking about non-viable SOEs. All viable SOEs, a minimum of 40% of your shares will be offloaded to the private sector through the stock exchange. Because once the private sector is involved and they have their share investments in it, the SOEs cannot continue doing what they are doing. Then privatize all other existing SOEs, those that are not viable. In fact, they have no reason to continue to exist. So that is even a much clearer case. You have to privatize all other SOEs and channel the proceeds into establishing a Ghana Sovereign Wealth Fund. Those of you who are in your 50s, 60s, 70s, when you were growing up, did you ever hear the name of Dubai? Or Qatar? Even Saudi Arabia? Did you hear about their names? because they have been able to manage their natural resource revenue and cycle them into a sovereign wealth fund. And this is what makes those countries rich and are able now to provide aid to you in Ghana. So we have to create a sovereign wealth fund. And all the proceeds from the SOEs that will be divesting can all be channeled into the Ghana Sovereign Wealth Fund. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, the second pillar under the economic cluster is industrial transformation. Now, I want you to understand that the development history of most of the matured economies in the world point to one fact: the importance of industrialization for economic development. And you can name them: United States, China, Japan, Germany, France, UK, South Korea, all in that order. The most powerful economies are also the most industrialized economies. There must be something about industrialization that has contributed to the advancement. And so the GTP has a very aggressive program for industrial transformation. Because of the time limitation, I cannot go into details, but just two of them. We will review the implementation of the One District, One Factory program and even put more money into One District, One Factory, because that was my idea, and I know what it can do for our country. Apart from that, we will accelerate the implementation of 10 new strategic anchor industries for our country. How can we depend on only cocoa for over a century to drive our economy? This is an indictment. Is there anybody that is holding us from diversifying our economy? Or maybe you can explain to me. So, the GTP would ensure that 10 new strategic industries now will be introduced. I already started that when I was the Minister for Trade and Industry. Number one, vehicle assembly and component manufacturing. Today, just with your mind and writing policy like the GTP, within 1.5 years, we were able to attract 5 of the 6 global companies in Ghana. As we speak here, Volkswagen is producing 5 different models in this country, unparalleled in the history of Volkswagen. Nissan is producing about 3 to 4 models. Hyundai, Kia, they are all doing the same. And so the value of government is to make policy. And it doesn't cost to make policy. If you make the right policies, the money will come. You don't need to borrow. Don't let anybody convince you that you only need to borrow to advance. So, vehicle assembly, garments and textiles. Bangladesh earns over $30 billion every year just from sewing goods, garments and textiles, and exporting. Pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals. How is it that with all the experience of African nations that have exported their oil and gas resources and have remained poor, that we are also repeating the same thing? When, if we add value to oil and gas, we'll get fertilizers, we'll get bitumen, we'll get so many plastics. Are you aware that plastics are produced from oil and gas? Plastics. So there goes the solution for you. Integrated bauxite and aluminum, iron and steel, industrial salt. That is where you get caustic soda. For you to be able to treat the water that you drink. We have so much of industrial salt in this country, and yet we are not doing much with it. Then the other one is assembly of electrical and electronic appliances and components. Do you need to import air conditioners? Do you need to import fridges? In the early 60s, we were producing Akasanuma, we were producing Sanyo. It means that Ghana, we have actually gone back. The government of national unity is going to restore all that. And I could go on, but I cannot conclude on this particular session without talking about the establishment of industrial parks. This magic about Asia, the Asian tigers, is all from industrial estates, industrial parks. And Ghana, we are now going to establish a new industrial city in Ashanti region. And it will be the showpiece of the whole continent of Africa. It's going to become the new manufacturing hub for West Africa. Let me move on because of time. Let me move on to agriculture. In the agricultural sector, we are going to embark on a new agricultural revolution. We are going to embark on a new agricultural revolution. And some of the policies that will underpin this revolution is the establishment of what we call agro-parks and processing clusters. So if Maureen gives ODK 5 or 10,000 hectares, then the government is a purely private initiative. Nana gives you land. And it has to be large acreages of land. And within that enclave, you make sure that you have irrigation, you make sure that you have processing, you make sure that you have input suppliers, and you make sure that you have the linkage to the market. So basically, you are building an ecosystem that will make sure that agriculture will succeed. And then also, we will strengthen what we call mass participation in agricultural activities in Ghana. During my friend Odike, his best friend, or who used to be his friend, Captain Kyeremanten, because of the Operation Feed Yourself. But you see the power of policy. Kyeremanten said, mass mobilization of citizens in agriculture. But he says, Operation what? Feed Yourself. That is why Operation Feed Yourself was essentially and primarily targeting household gardens and producing only to feed for yourself. Under the enterprise economy of the government for national unity, it is not going to be Operation Feed Yourself. It's going to be Operation Own Your Own Farm as a business. Everybody, one way or the other, has access to some land and will support you to own your own farm. If you go to Botswana, one of the leading exporters of beef, not only to Africa, but to the whole of the world, everybody has cattle. Everybody has cattle. And it is because of government policy. So if you have land somewhere else, make sure that the Alliance for Revolutionary Change and Alan comes into power and you own your own farm. We are also going to foster partnerships with faith-based organizations to drive mass agriculture production. You know, the churches, anything they touch becomes gold. And we can mobilize these faith-based organizations in a very massive way into large-scale commercial farming. And the same thing also applies to educational institutions. I don't know about you, but when we were growing up, most of our schools had school farms. Are you aware of that? School farms. The enterprise economy is going to bring school farms back. And then I am going to introduce a new cutting-edge and innovative technology for inducing rain. For inducing rain and harvesting rain in Ghana. What's it? Now I just want us to rush through. The last pillar under the economic cluster is tourism. So if you look at the economic clusters, they are all strong, productive sectors. If we're focusing on just these four, by now, Ghana, we will be lending money to the IMF. So under tourism, very quickly, we want to make sure that Ghana becomes the center of tourism in the whole of Africa. Can you imagine that Ghana has 32 out of the 42 UNESCO World Heritage Sites? 32 out of the 42 heritage sites in the whole world. And you can't be the center of tourism. A country that is the center of the world. You know Ghana is the center of the world? You are aware of that? This is where the equator crosses. There's no other country that can make that claim. If it were in another country, by now, that alone can pay for all our bills. So we are also going to incentivize the private sector to invest in tourism facilities. The government must stop loading upon itself responsibilities that they cannot undertake. Allow the private sector to invest in tourism, and you see the difference. Let me move on quickly. This is the economic cluster. I could go on and on and on, but I want to close with the governance cluster, because this is a critical and integral part of how Ghana can come out of the ditch that we find ourselves. So it's not just about the economic cluster. The level and the cost of corruption alone can significantly turn around our economy if we do the right thing. So to enhance the quality of governance, we propose the following policy solutions. Demonstrate a leadership of personal integrity and political will to fight corruption. And it's not just about you as an individual. You have to have the strength and firmness of character to deal with people who are corrupt around you. It is not enough to say I'm not corrupt, but people around you are corrupt. The next is isolate all corruption-related provisions in existing legislation and consolidate them into one omnibus legislation. That's the only way you can fight corruption. Right now, Siraj says they are dealing with corruption. Yoko is dealing with corruption. Office of Special Prosecutor is dealing with corruption. So who is actually dealing with corruption? Even the definition of corruption is in abeyance. And so we are proposing that we will amend the Constitution, not just to consolidate all these legislation that is supposed to be fighting corruption. We'll consolidate that and appoint an anti-corruption czar who will have independent prosecutorial authority separate from that of the Attorney General. Because you cannot have a special prosecutor who derives his legal authority and power from another person. So we have to make sure that they have independent existence. Then empower civil society and all corruption-related private sector organizations by providing them with direct and indirect support to be able to join government against the fight for corruption. Enhance the administration of justice with the necessary infrastructure and logistical support. That's the only way they can also improve their work environment. Abolish the Council of States. And establish a new second chamber of parliament with representation from key stakeholders, including the faith-based organizations, traditional authorities, professional bodies, artisanal associations, gender-based organizations, the private sector, labor unions, and then people with disability. You see, that is the truly representative government. That is what you call an all-inclusive government of national unity. And that is going to happen. Now, the second chamber will be vested with powers of oversight over executive action. The power vested in the president by our constitution allows the presidency to be able to control even institutions that under the constitution are supposed to be independent constitutional bodies. And there will be no checks and balances with those provisions in our constitution. And then also, we will amend Article 66(1) to extend the term of office of the President of the Republic from 4 years to 5 years, and be eligible for re-election for a second term. But under this arrangement, no person shall have the right to be elected as president for more than 2 terms. Establish a national reserve force in our security agencies to be composed of graduates from tertiary institutions who opt after their graduation for a 6-month period of training in the security services. It's not going to be compulsory, but I know what I'm telling you. If we allow that to occur, it's not compulsory, and our young people take the advantage of going through training in the security service, That will be the future of Ghana for you. In our relations with foreign countries, we will adopt the principle of positive neutrality, which is anchored on the strategic interests of Ghana. That comes first. And then, of course, our shared values for humanity, and then for the preservation of peace around the world. And again, the GTP has so many far-reaching policy solutions for our governance architecture. But I promised you that I was going to focus on just the economic cluster and then governance. But before I rest my case, otherwise I'm sure I will get into trouble. Let me just close with one or two policy prescriptions in the health sector and in the education sector. Under the social services cluster, particularly the health sector, we are going to undertake a comprehensive assessment of the state of all existing public health infrastructure and facilities across the country. We don't even know the state of the infrastructure we have, and still we are building more. Now, you all know Kolebu and Okomfanochi. True or false? Kolebu and Okomfanochi, Maria is a medical doctor. They are supposed to be not teaching, just teaching hospitals. They are supposed to be referral hospitals. So you don't go to Kolebu with a case of headache. And so we are going to introduce what we call the GP system, general practitioners system, which is based on the primary care model around your own community. Again, in most of the developed economies, everybody has a GP. And the GP is your first point of call before you start even thinking about a referral. It's the GP that will make a referral for you. But in order to maximize the use of the Kolebu and Okomfanochi strategic locations, we are going to reconstruct in a phased approach both Kolebu and then Okomfanochi, using private capital. And when this occurs, the kind of teaching and tertiary hospital that you find, you can compare that to any in the rest of the world. But if you have a piecemeal approach to refurbishing wards in Kolebu and then Okomfanochi, you think you're solving the problem? You're not solving the problem. But there's a lot of private capital that is ready to invest in facilities of that nature. On education, the strategic objective of the GTP is to equip children with knowledge and skills that will make them employable and position them for the world of work. How is it that we are training young people and they come out of school and they don't have access to jobs? So what kind of training were we giving to them? What kind of training were we giving to them? And meanwhile, our manufacturing companies are complaining that they don't have the right kind of staff. Now, we will conduct a comprehensive review of the free SHS program with a view to improving its operationalization, but based on the following. 1, financial sustainability of the program. 2, the infrastructural requirements. 3, the curriculum development that we ought to be promoting under the free SHS. 4, capacity building of teachers and non-teaching staff. And last but not the least, transitioning free SHS graduates who come from the tertiary institutions or who will be going to the tertiary institutions, transitioning them into the field or the world of work. So our review of the free SHS, because there's been no comprehensive review now, it will not be appropriate for me to talk about specific measures. When the review occurs, we'll know what to do with free SHS. Then institute, listen to this, institute a compulsory certified program of apprenticeship and internship for all SHS students and students from the technical and vocational school graduates. It has to be a compulsory apprenticeship and internship program. Many of the young people who come out of school in Europe, in the United States, the reason why they become employable is that either whilst they are in school or when they come out, they've already had the experience of working in a particular industry or the other. And then, last but not the least, we would also introduce a compulsory program for professional attachment in relevant institutions, organizations, and companies for those who are now graduating from the tertiary institutions. So the first one I talked about is for free SHS graduates, and this one is for the tertiary graduates. Now, I'll just make one comment on youth, on the youth. This basically is at the heart of the GDP. But again, because of time limitation, I'll just introduce one of the policy initiatives. Design and implement a comprehensive national program for graduates of all tertiary institutions to start their own small business with a grant from government under a new program called the Start Your Own Business. There are many high-profile entrepreneurs in this country who have passed through my hands. I won't mention names, but I know what support to entrepreneurs at the early stage can do for our private sector. So, how is it that we are expecting people who are coming out of the tertiary institutions, 300,000 graduating every year, adding to the stock that already exists? Meanwhile, the public sector cannot employ more than 700,000 people, and it's already choked. So we must not be thinking, all these people who are coming out, where do you think they are going to be employed? I can tell you, don't be deceived. It ain't going to happen unless we make sure, right from the beginning when they come out of schools, it is government responsibility to give them grant funding to start their own business. Look, all the people you are celebrating in this country, name them. Facebook owner, Microsoft, all of them. Some of them actually left school without completing. But because of the support that the US government grants to them, they've been able to move from where they started as young people to where they are now. I can say this with authority because I'm sure by now, even at the risk of sounding boastful, I'm sure you're aware that in 1994, when they were looking for the 100 global leaders of the future, only 100 people in the whole world, they mentioned first Bill Gates. They mentioned Bill Gates. They mentioned John F. Kennedy Jr. They mentioned Condoleezza Rice. And those of you who know development economics, they mentioned Jeffrey Sachs. And they mentioned Kyeremanten of Ghana. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've paid my dues. I've paid my dues. Now, in conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there's a brighter future for Ghana and for all Ghanaians with the adoption and execution of this great transformational plan. I want you gathered here and the people of Ghana to make me the next president of the Republic of Ghana. To make me the next president of the Republic of Ghana, and Ghana will rise again. So, I thank you sincerely for your presence here and your very kind attention. May God bless our homeland Ghana and make our nation great and strong.
Choboy! 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 Two.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, with those remarks, I have the honor and privilege of formally launching the great transformational plan. Oh, please, you can sit. Please, you can sit.
Please take your seat. Thank you. Choboy! Yeah! 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 Oh yeah. Alan Beba. Alan Chematiana Yenim. Alan Chematiana Yenimo. Obiara niho, Obiara tisano, Alan Chematiana Yenim. Choboy! Choboy! Please take your seats.
Shall we resume our seats, please?
Yes, and let's all be patient. We are going to have copies of the great transformational plan.
And everyone will get a copy before you leave here, so be patient, it will get to you. Please resume your seats and let's proceed.
Exactly so. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'd like to take the single opportunity to as well acknowledge the presence of Bafo, Dr. Osei Kyeremanten Bretio II. Otumfuo's Marie Hene, he is here with us. A round of applause for Bafo, Dr. Osei Kyeremanten Bretio II. Nana, you're most welcome. He is the former board chair for Ghana Export Development Investment Fund. Nana, we are highly grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, as well, we have in our midst the anchors representing the Great Alliance and representing the movement for change across all 16 regions of Ghana. And in no due order, may I take the respectful chance and opportunity to acknowledge all of them. Please, can we have some silence in the auditorium? Kindly give us a wave if we mention your region.